October 18, 1957. 5:41. A crate waited in a Harlem hallway where it did not belong, its label clean, its silence loud, and Bumpy Johnson stopped walking before his shoe touched the tile. The hallway belonged to no one at that hour. Not the tenants, not the porters, not the men who usually arrived loud and late. It belonged to memory. Bumpy Johnson stepped into it the way a man steps into a room he built himself, without asking permission. The floor tiles were clean enough to show yesterday's work. The walls held the smell of old paper and warm dust. Everything sat where it had always sat. Except the crate. It waited just past the stairwell, close enough to be deliberate, far enough to be careless. Wood slats, fresh nails. The grain was pale, recently cut. Someone had wiped it down. That alone was wrong. Nothing in this building was wiped down unless it had first been handled too many times. Bumpy did not stop because of fear. He stopped because of balance. The crate's label faced outward, neat block letters, a destination that made sense only if you didn't know the building. The ink was still dark, too dark. The rope around it had not yet softened from use. New rope always told on itself. It held tension the way men did when they planned to lie. He shifted his weight, just enough to listen. The building answered back in small ways, pipes settling, a door 3 floors up closing too carefully. Somewhere, a man breathing slower than he meant to. Bumpy bent slightly, not to touch, not to inspect, but to let the smell reach him. Oil faint, not machine oil, something lighter, something meant to slide. That was the risk. Not the crate itself. The assumption behind it. Someone had believed he would walk past. Someone had believed the early hour would dull him. Someone had believed the hallway was empty. Bumpy straightened. His face did not change. His hands stayed loose at his sides. He took one step closer, then stopped again, leaving a clear foot of space between himself and the wood. Distance mattered. Distance showed respect, for rules, for consequences, for the idea that once you crossed a line, you owned what came after. He did not signal. He did not call a name. He did not summon protection. Instead, he looked at the floor. There were marks there, light scuffs where the crate had been dragged, then lifted, then dragged again. Indecision left tracks, confidence did not. By morning, this would need to be settled, not announced, settled. The building could not wake up carrying a question like this. Questions spread. They attracted answers you didn't choose. Bumpy turned away. That was the part no one ever understood. The danger had already passed, not because it wasn't real, but because it had been seen. Seen things lost their leverage. As he walked on, the crate stayed where it was, holding its breath, holding its secret, waiting for the kind of attention it would not survive. He took the long way out of the building. Not to avoid anything. To let the place speak again. Morning crept toward Harlem without ceremony. Light pressed against windows but did not enter yet. Bumpy Johnson moved through familiar thresholds, touching nothing, changing nothing. Men respected spaces when they believed they were being watched. He wanted to know who forgot that rule when they thought no one was listening. Outside, the street was quiet in the way only working streets ever were, not asleep, waiting, the kind of quiet that kept records. Bumpy paused at the curb and looked back once, not at the doorway, but at the idea of it. He measured how long the crate would sit before someone decided to correct their mistake. Some men rushed to clean their tracks. Others froze. Hopping stillness could pass for innocence. He knew which kind worried him more. The internal deadline settled without words. By the time shadows shortened and voices returned to normal volume, this would resolve. Not because he demanded it, because unresolved weight-bent systems until they cracked. He crossed the street and stopped beside a delivery truck that had been parked there too long. The driver pretended to adjust a mirror. His hands shook just enough to be noticed. Bumpy didn't look at him. He didn't need to. People always revealed themselves by what they overdid. Bumpy walked on. The city took notes even when no one wrote them down. Doors remembered who hesitated. Floors remembered who dragged their feet. Schedules remembered who showed up early when they were never early before. Back inside, the crate waited. It had not moved. That told him more than motion ever could. Someone was arguing with themselves. Someone was hopping silence would grow roots. Bumpy stopped again, closer this time, still leaving space. He leaned his head slightly, the way a man listens to a verdict before it's spoken. Soft wood creaked, not from inside, from the building adjusting around it. The hallway didn't like the crate either. He spoke once quietly, to no one in particular. Things that don't belong don't last. The words weren't a threat, they were a statement of maintenance. He turned and walked away for the second time. This time the building exhaled, not relief, recognition. By the time the city woke fully, men would start making choices they believed were their own. Routes would be altered, conversations shortened. One chair would remain empty longer than expected. The crate would be handled, carefully, with permission that had not been asked for but had already been granted by inevitability. Bumpy did not need to watch it happen. Judgment did not require attendance. The only question left hanging in the hallway was a simple one, heavy enough to last until morning. Who thought the weight would change without being noticed? By late morning, Harlem had found its voice again. Not loud. Certain. Deliveries resumed. Doors opened on time. Men took their places the way they always did, believing routine was camouflage. Bumpy Johnson let them believe it. He sat where he was expected to sit, stood where standing made sense, and spoke only when silence would have drawn more attention. The crate was still there. Not in the hallway anymore. That would have been too obvious. It had been shifted to a service room off the main floor, positioned like it had always belonged. Someone had even placed a broom beside it, an old trick meant to suggest history. Bumpy noticed the broom first. The bristles were dry, unused. He did not approach, he watched who did. Men passed it one by one. Some glanced, some didn't. One man slowed, then corrected himself, walking faster than necessary. That was a mistake. Speed was as revealing as fear. Bumpy leaned against a counter and listened to the sounds of work. Crates thudding, paper tearing, a radio murmuring news no one cared about. He could tell who was carrying weight by how they shifted their shoulders before lifting anything at all. The system was speaking. He let it finish its sentence. He asked a question that sounded harmless. Who changed the morning route? No accusation, no edge, just a pause afterward that made the air feel thinner. Answers came quickly, too quickly. Names offered themselves without being asked. Explanations piled up, careful and useless. Bumpy nodded once as if satisfied he was. He walked away, letting the lie settle into its own shape. Lies always collapsed if you gave them space. The internal deadline pressed quietly now, not as urgency, as gravity. By nightfall, the truth would surface because it would be tired of holding itself together. Bumpy stopped near the service room door. He did not enter. He placed his hand flat against the wall instead. The vibration of the building told him enough. Someone had already decided to move the crate again. The question wasn't whether it would be corrected. It was who believed they still had time. The room in the back had no windows. That was why men liked it. What couldn't see you, couldn't remember you. Bumpy Johnson stepped inside without ceremony. The door stayed open behind him. He preferred it that way. Closed doors suggested fear of interruption. He wasn't afraid of witnesses. The crate was not in the center of the room anymore. Someone had nudged it toward the wall, angling it so the label faced inward. Hiding was a confession. Bumpy let his eyes rest on the scuffed concrete beside it. Fresh marks, a turn, a hesitation. The story was written where no one thought to erase it. 3 men were already there, pretending to be busy. Paper shuffled. A pencil tapped, then stopped when the sound felt too loud. No one spoke first. They waited for instruction. Bumpy didn't give it. He set a thin ledger on the table and slid it forward an inch. The movement was small. It carried weight because it wasn't rushed. Names filled the pages in clean rows. Times, routes, hands that had signed without thinking. He looked at the man nearest the door. Who touched it last? The question was calm, not sharp. Calm questions were worse. They gave you nowhere to hide your tone. The man swallowed. He did not answer. Bumpy nodded once, as if that silence had been expected. He turned the ledger so the page faced them all. He did not point. He didn't need to. Things only disappear, he said, when someone thinks I'm gone. The room adjusted to that sentence. Shoulders sank. Breath slowed. One man reached for a cigarette, then remembered where he was and stopped. Bumpy waited. Waiting was his method. Men talked themselves into truth when they realized no one was coming to rescue them from it. A voice finally broke the stillness. Not loud, not defiant, just tired. The carrier spoke without lifting his head. He explained the switch as if it were an inconvenience, not a decision. A favor owed, a message passed along. He never said who asked. He didn't have to. Bumpy heard the shape of it. The crate had been meant to leave the building by afternoon. Quietly. Replaced with something that weighed the same but meant less. The hallway had been chosen because no one stood there long enough to notice. Except Bumpy had. He closed the ledger. The sound was soft, final. If you touch what holds us up, he said, you stand alone. No threat followed. No instruction. He didn't need to explain what standing alone looked like. Everyone in that room already knew. Standing alone meant doors that didn't open for you anymore. Routes that forgot your name. A city that stopped scheduling you. Bumpy turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. The men stayed where they were. They would remain there until they understood what had already happened. By evening, the crate was back where it belonged. Same hallway, same orientation. The label faced outward again, dulled now, smudged by careful hands. It had not been opened. That mattered. Some lines could be uncrossed if you acted before night decided for you. Bumpy passed it once more without stopping. He did not look down. He did not slow. The building felt lighter for it. The carrier did not clock in the next day. No one asked why. No one needed to. The schedule corrected itself. A name was missing. The space where it had been remained blank longer than was comfortable. Bumpy moved through Harlem as he always did, unhurried, unchanged. Order didn't announce victories. It simply continued. And somewhere between the quiet of that service room and the certainty of an empty chair, one question settled into the city, unanswered and heavy enough to last. When balance is restored, who is it really restored for? Nothing obvious changed. That was the point. Harlem did not gasp or flinch. It simply shifted its weight, the way it always did when something dangerous had passed through and failed to stay. Bumpy Johnson noticed the changes because he noticed what didn't announce itself. A truck took a different corner. A door stayed locked 5 minutes longer than usual. A man who once lingered finished his work early and left without speaking. The crate remained in the hallway. Returned carefully, centered now. The broom was gone. Someone had understood that pretending history was worse than admitting error. The label had been rubbed with a thumb until the ink dulled. It no longer looked new. It no longer challenged the room. Bumpy paused across from it, not stopping, just slowing enough to let the moment register. The crate had made its journey, not across town, across conscience. That mattered more. He did not touch it. He never had. Touching would have implied ownership. Ownership belonged to the system, not the man who kept it balanced. Men passed him with nods that meant different things than they had yesterday. Respect deepened when it didn't need reassurance. Fear, when it existed, stayed quiet. Loud fear was unreliable. The carrier's route had already been reassigned, not announced, adjusted. A younger man carried the boxes now. His hands were steadier, not braver, just more aware. Bumpy watched him once, long enough to understand what kind of man he was. The young man lifted the crate without struggle. That told Bumpy everything. Weight that belonged did not fight back. The internal deadline loosened its grip. Not gone, resolved. There would be no sudden correction tonight, no late knock. The city had chosen continuity. Bumpy walked the long way around the block, letting the afternoon breathe. This was the part people never saw, not the decision, the confirmation. At a corner storefront, he stopped. Inside, men argued quietly over numbers that now added up again. No one looked up when he passed. They didn't need to. His presence had already been accounted for. He continued on, unhurried. The truth had surfaced without being dragged into the light. It had spoken because it had nowhere left to hide. Still, one thing remained unfinished, not the crate, the absence. By nightfall, the carrier would understand what it meant when a city stopped expecting you. The question waiting ahead was simple, and it did not hurry him. How long does it take a man to realize he has already taken his last route? Streetlights blinked on one by one, not in unison, but with the patience of things that had done this before. Harlem settled into its evening rhythm, the one that didn't rush because it didn't need to prove anything. Bumpy Johnson took a seat near the window of a small office that overlooked the block. He did not own the place. He did not need to. Ownership was loud. Influence was quiet and already paid for. Below, men moved crates where they were told to move them, not because they were afraid, because the system made sense again. Sense was persuasive. The crate was visible from here, just the edge of it, half shadowed by the doorway. It had not been opened. That was important. Some things, once exposed, never fit back into the structure that held them. This one had been spared by timing, not mercy. A man entered the office without knocking. He stood near the door, waiting. Bumpy did not turn. "The carrier asked for his route back," the man said. Bumpy remained still. Silence stretched just long enough to feel deliberate. "What did you tell him?" Bumpy asked. "That it was filled." Bumpy nodded once. Filled meant finished. Routes didn't reopen once the city had learned how to function without you. It was never personal. That was the part men struggled with. They wanted punishment. Punishment meant attention. Absence was cleaner. The man hesitated, then spoke again. He said it was a misunderstanding. Bumpy looked out the window now. A woman laughed across the street. A car horn sounded, impatient, then moved on. Life had already absorbed the correction. "Everything is," Bumpy said. That ended the conversation. The man left the way he had entered, quietly, without relief or resentment, just understanding. Later, Bumpy walked the block one last time. The crate had been moved again, this time to its final destination, a storeroom with records older than anyone who worked there. It sat among others like it, indistinguishable now. That was the real consequence, not removal, reduction. He stood in the doorway and allowed himself a single pause, not to admire the outcome, to confirm it. The hallway felt ordinary again. That was the signal. Extraordinary weight always announced itself. Ordinary weight belonged. By the next morning, the carrier would wake early out of habit. He would dress. He would leave the house. Somewhere along the way, the routine would fail him. A door that no longer opened. A nod that never came back. The city would not argue with him. It would simply move on. Bumpy Johnson did not follow the thought further. Consequences didn't need witnesses once they were set in motion. He turned away and went home, leaving behind a block that had already forgotten the sound of the wrong weight being dragged across its floor. One certainty remained, settled and immovable, heavy enough to last without explanation. When a system survives your absence, what does that say about the role you thought you played? The block woke the way it always did, not remembering yesterday because it didn't need to. Trucks arrived on time. Keys turned in locks that had learned the shape of familiar hands. Coffee steamed in paper cups. Routine stitched the hours together with small, dependable motions. The crate sat where it belonged. Not the hallway this time. A storeroom deeper in the building, among others that looked just like it. No special placement. No caution tape. Just wood and weight and numbers written in chalk that meant something to people who understood records. That was the consequence. Not removal. Normalcy. Bumpy Johnson passed the entrance at a steady pace. He did not glance toward the storeroom. Looking would have suggested attachment. He had none. He had only maintenance. Inside, a schedule hung on a nail by the office door. Names listed in ink that had dried years ago, times adjusted in pencil. One line remained blank where it had never been blank before. No mark through it. No explanation written beside it. Blank was cleaner. Men noticed it in stages, first as a pause, then as a question they did not ask, then as a fact they stepped around. Someone reached for a pen once, stopped, and put it back. The city disliked corrections that pretended to be temporary. A chair near the loading table stayed empty longer than it should have. No one moved it. No one claimed it. It became part of the room's shape, like a missing tooth you learned not to touch. Bumpy stood nearby long enough to see the system accept the absence. He did not oversee it. He let it complete itself. A younger man took the carrier's place without ceremony. He lifted boxes with the care of someone who understood what they represented, not just what they weighed. He did not ask questions. He did not test edges. Bumpy watched once, then looked away. Power that lingered too long at the sight of its own decision weakened. He had made the correction. Staying to admire it would have been indulgence. He stepped out into the street, letting the morning take him back. The city moved around him, not because it had to, but because it always had. One thought remained, quiet and unresolved, hanging over the blank line on that schedule like a final accounting. When a habit disappears, is it lost, or has it finally told the truth about how little it mattered? By mid-morning, the absence had settled into the building the way dust did, thin, even, impossible to argue with. The chair stayed empty. It did not wait for anyone anymore. Someone moved around it once, then stopped doing even that. The room learned its new proportions. Rooms were good at learning. People were slower. Bumpy Johnson returned only because his path took him there anyway. He did not arrive to confirm anything. Confirmation had already happened. He crossed the threshold and felt nothing resist him. That was how he knew it was finished. The storeroom door stood open. Inside, the crates formed clean lines, numbers chalked in a careful hand. The one that had caused the trouble blended perfectly now. Same height, same grain, same quiet. Whatever temptation it once carried had been stripped by exposure, then buried by order. Bumpy stopped at the doorway and did not step in. A man nearby cleared his throat, then thought better of it. Another checked a clipboard that no longer needed checking. Work continued, not faster, not slower, just right. The carrier did not appear. No one said his name. Names once unused faded quickly. They didn't fight for relevance. They simply stopped being called. Across the street, a time clock clicked as it always had. Cards slid into their places. One slot remained untouched. By habit, by instinct, someone waited for it to fill. It didn't. The clock moved on. Bumpy turned away. He understood the difference between punishment and consequence. Punishment required attention. Consequence required only alignment. The city preferred the second. It preserved energy that way. As he walked, the morning unfolded ahead of him with no gaps to account for. Deliveries would finish on schedule. Routes would close cleanly. Accounts would balance. The crate would never be mentioned again, which was the surest sign it had been dealt with correctly. At the corner, he paused once, not to look back but to listen. The sounds were ordinary: footsteps, engines, voices layered without tension. Ordinary meant stable, stable meant complete. Bumpy Johnson continued on, leaving behind a system that no longer needed his presence to behave. The final certainty rested where it always had, heavy and undeniable, like an object no one touched but everyone worked around. If order survives without you, were you ever essential, or only tolerated until the moment you chose wrong?